On June 21, 1582, a temple in Kyoto called Honno-ji burned to the ground, with the most powerful man in Japan trapped inside it. His name was Oda Nobunaga. In roughly 2 decades of constant warfare, he had conquered close to a third of the country and come closer than any warlord before him to uniting all of Japan. That night, one of his own generals surrounded the temple with thousands of troops and set it on fire. When his men searched through the ashes afterward, they never found his body. More than 4 centuries later, historians still cannot say for certain exactly how Japan's most famous warlord died or why the man who killed him did it. To understand how a man that powerful ended up surrounded in a burning temple, start decades earlier in the small province of Owari. Nobunaga was born there in 1534, the son of a minor warlord in a country broken into dozens of warring domains. As a teenager and young man, he dressed in loud, unconventional clothes, walked through town eating in public like a commoner, and ignored the formal manners expected of a lord's heir. His own retainers reportedly called him Owari no Outsuk, the Fool of Owari, and when his father died in 1551, most of his own clan assumed the family's fortunes would collapse under him. They were wrong. In 1560, the neighboring warlord Imagawa Yoshimoto marched a large invading army through Owari on his way toward Kyoto. Nobunaga's forces were vastly outnumbered. Rather than retreat or negotiate, he force-marched a small strike force through a sudden storm and hit the Imagawa camp at Okehazama by surprise. Yoshimoto was killed in the chaos. Overnight, the Fool of Owari became one of the most feared commanders in Japan. Over the next decade, Nobunaga expanded his territory year by year, and he did it without much regard for tradition or restraint. His most controversial act came in 1571. The temple complex of Enryaku-ji on Mount Hiei above Kyoto was one of the most powerful religious institutions in Japan, and it had sheltered his political enemies. Nobunaga surrounded the mountain with his army and burned it to the ground. His forces killed monks who had lived their entire lives in prayer. They killed the women and children who had taken refuge alongside them. Contemporary accounts, including those of Japanese chroniclers and European missionaries living in Japan at the time, describe the death toll in the thousands, though the exact number was likely inflated in later retellings. It was not an isolated act. Nobunaga treated any institution that defied him, temple, clan, or fortress, the same way. He did not fight for religious reasons, and he did not spare people for them either. And yet the same man who burned Mount Hiei welcomed European Jesuit missionaries into his court, granted them land to build a church in Kyoto, and reportedly spent hours questioning them about the shape of the world and the workings of their firearms. Nobunaga did not care what a person believed. He cared whether they were useful or whether they were in his way. That same appetite for anything useful reshaped how Japan fought its wars. Portuguese traders had brought matchlock guns, called Tanegashima, to Japan a decade before Nobunaga was even born, but most warlords still built their armies around samurai cavalry. Nobunaga built his around gunpowder. The proof came in 1575 at the Battle of Nagashino. The Takeda clan, whose cavalry was considered the most feared in Japan, charged Nobunaga's allied lines. Behind wooden palisades, Nobunaga had positioned ranks of gunners with matchlock weapons, and traditional accounts describe them firing in organized volleys to keep a continuous wall of gunfire going while the charge broke against it. Historians still debate exactly how coordinated those volleys were, but the outcome is not in dispute. The Takeda cavalry, the pride of one of Japan's great warrior clans, was shattered in a single afternoon by men with guns standing behind a fence. 6 years later, in 1581, Nobunaga's openness to the outside world brought one more addition to his court. An African man named Yasuke, brought to Japan by a Jesuit missionary. Nobunaga was reportedly so struck by him that he had him scrub his skin to check the color was real, then took him into personal service, making him, by most accounts, the first foreign-born man to hold the status of a samurai retainer in Japan. His full story is told in another episode of this channel. He would still be at Nobunaga's side in Kyoto 1 year later. By June of 1582, Nobunaga controlled more of Japan than any single lord in over a century, and he believed the rest was within reach. He was staying at Honno-ji, a temple in Kyoto, with only a small personal guard. The bulk of his army was elsewhere, en route to reinforce a campaign led by his general Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Another of his most trusted generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, was marching a separate army toward the same front. Mitsuhide never arrived there. In the early hours of June 21st, he turned his army around, surrounded Honno-ji instead, and attacked his own lord. Why he did it is still one of the most argued questions in Japanese history. Some accounts point to a personal grudge built up over years of public humiliations Nobunaga was known to inflict on his own retainers. Others suggest simple ambition, a chance to seize power while Nobunaga's forces were scattered elsewhere. Later theories, impossible to prove, suggest Mitsuhide was pushed toward it by rivals or acted with knowledge he never lived to explain. No confession, no letter, no reliable contemporary account settles it. It remains open. What happened inside the temple is almost as unclear. Nobunaga's guard was overwhelmed within hours. Tradition holds he fought briefly, then set the hall on fire and killed himself rather than be captured. But no surviving eyewitness account confirms the moment itself, only what people piece together afterward from a burned building and a missing body. Yasuke was elsewhere in Kyoto that day and joined the fighting to defend Nobunaga's son at a nearby castle before being captured. Accounts say Mitsuhide's men chose to spare him, reportedly because they did not consider a foreigner worth killing. He was handed over to the Jesuits and vanishes from the historical record after that. Mitsuhide did not enjoy his victory for long. Word reached Hideyoshi within days. He made peace with the enemy he had been fighting, marched his army back toward Kyoto at a pace that stunned his contemporaries, and crushed Mitsuhide at the Battle of Yamazaki, less than 2 weeks after Honno-ji. Mitsuhide died fleeing the battlefield, killed, by most accounts, by local farmers, not by soldiers. His reign as Nobunaga's successor had lasted 11 days. Hideyoshi inherited what Nobunaga had built and finished the work of uniting Japan. When Hideyoshi died in turn, it was Tokugawa Ieyasu, once Nobunaga's ally, whose own story this channel has already told, who took what was left and built 2.5 centuries of peace on top of it. Nobunaga himself never got to see any of it. The man who might have unified Japan by his own hand instead became the reason someone else had to finish the job. In at least one surviving letter, Nobunaga referred to himself by a title borrowed from Buddhist mythology, the Demon King of the Sixth Heaven. Historians still debate how seriously he meant it and whether it was a genuine boast or a piece of calculated theater aimed at a rival. Either way, it stuck. Today, that reputation has outlived everyone who actually knew him. He may be the most recognizable name to come out of that century, the ruthless, ambitious warlord who shows up again and again in games and films about the era, usually as the figure everyone else in the story is either serving or trying to stop. That reputation is not wrong. He was ruthless. He did burn Mount Hiei. He did rewrite how Japan made war. What gets lost is the ending. No body, no confession from his killer, no certainty, even now, about the final hour of the man who came closer than anyone before him to ruling all of Japan. If this story was worth your time, subscribe. Forgotten Japan tells the stories that the famous tales of samurai and shoguns leave out.